بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين على نبينا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to another episode of our series on Al-Qawaid Al-Fiqhiyya, Islamic legal maxims. In our last episode we discussed the major legal maxim Al-Yaqinu la yuzalu bil-shak. Certainty is not displaced by doubt. And this maxim has many corollaries or subsidiaries. So in this episode we'll be discussing some of those subsidiaries. The first is al-aslu bara'atu dhimma. Again, the word that keeps coming up in the corollaries of this maxim is the word asl. So it has many meanings in fiqh and in usul fiqh, and the one that's intended here is the basic rule, the starting assumption, the default rule. So the basic starting rule is bara'atu dhimma. Bara'a is one of the surahs of the Quran, is sometimes called Bara'a. It's another name for Surah At-Tawbah. It comes from the first word in the surah. And bara'a is a noun derived from the verb bara'a, and one of its meanings is to be free from or to be exonerated from. So the word bari means to be innocent. The word dhimma means responsibility, and as a technical term, it is liability. So what it means, the overall meaning of this maxim is that the starting rule is that people are not liable for anything. So when a person is born into this life, they don't owe debts. In contrast to some of the practices, unfortunately and shamefully, I mean, from the news documentaries that I've seen about this practice, one of the places where you have slavery in its original form is still in some countries. And one of the early reasons that people became slaves in history was debt. So a person goes to work in some situation where they're not being paid a living wage. And so they keep borrowing from their employer and American law, which is inherited from that and developed out of it. So the principle that someone who is charged with a criminal offense is innocent until proven guilty, that is something which is well-founded in Islamic law, and it's also accepted in some man-made systems. So, for instance, Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he mentions in Al-Mustasfa a Maliki ruling where they said, if a person is brought and there's some suspicion that he has committed theft, and the police want to get a confession out of him, but they don't have enough evidence, but they really have good reason to believe that he's stoned, that they can beat him to extract a confession. And they base that ruling on maslaha, public benefit. And Al-Ghazali, took vigorous objection to that reasoning based on this principle that, people are innocent until proven guilty. Human beings are born with dignity. This is a God-given right. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah says, we have honored the children of Adam. So, nobody has a right to strip people of their dignity unless they're proven to have done something wrong, and then that stripping of dignity occurs within the limits of the law. The whole principle of the Sharia is that people are ruled by the law. The rulers and the public, the rulers and the ruled. Everybody is subject to the law. And if you have a system, which is what we see throughout the world, where there's a certain set of laws for the powerful and the privileged, and another set of laws for the weak and the dispossessed, then that is the essence of injustice. And so wherever you have a system that's running on that, whether it's in a Muslim country or a non-Muslim country, that's totally contradictory to the essence of the Sharia. So, al-aslu bara'at al-dhimma. Some other fiqh applications of this, they don't necessarily have to be legal issues per se. I remember reading a fatwa where there was a woman, she was a young mother, it's her first child, and she had been nursing her baby while lying down, and she fell asleep. And she woke up and the baby had turned blue. And when you're asleep, you turn from one side to another, and you're not really conscious of doing that. And so she was guilt-stricken that, oh my God, I must have turned over and I smothered my baby. And so the relative of this woman asked the scholar regarding the rule in her case. And he invoked this principle. He said, al-aslu bara'at al-dhimma. She would not be responsible to pay diya, or, there's no legal repercussions to this because there's no evidence that anything happened. There's a syndrome called sudden infant death syndrome. It's a medical syndrome that's been well described in the medical literature, that sometimes babies just stop breathing. They're perfectly healthy as far as anyone knew, but for some reason they stop breathing. So given that that is a medical reality, and given that she was asleep and she didn't know what she did, then the presumption is that she was not the cause of her child's death. Another example of this principle is that somebody loans a car. He loans his car to somebody, and the person is driving the car, and something goes wrong with the car. Let's say the transmission breaks down. The owner of the car doesn't have the right to say, hey, wait a minute, the car broke while you were using it. You need to pay to get it fixed. The transmission, unless you can prove that this person, he put sawdust in the transmission case, or there has to be some evidence that he was the cause, because when you use a car, it's a used car, parts wear out. These things happen. So the asl is, the starting rule is that person who borrowed it is not liable for the damage unless he has been explicitly proved to have had a hand in it. Another example of that is that if a person is, he's renting a house out to a renter, the renter is not required to pay for the maintenance, the repairs of the house, for major repairs. That's because that's not his responsibility. The repairs are for the benefit of the owner, and he's not the owner. Therefore, he is not responsible. So let's take a break, and we're back shortly, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Where truth is hidden, misleading quotations create confusion. Where truth is hidden, lack of knowledge and wisdom cause upheaval and commotion. Where truth is hidden, manipulated scriptures and twisted facts emerge. This very hidden truth creates false propaganda, mayhem, chaos, disorder, and turmoil in our lives and the world order. But is there anyone with courage and wisdom? What is the truth, and who has the courage to expose it? Because it's your right to know the truth.
Watch truth prevail and lies perish in Truth Exposed by Dr. Zakir Naik every Sunday to Friday at 11 p.m. UK and 12 a.m. Europe on Peace TV.
For understanding Quran, we have to know how many words are there. If we want to understand the Quran, we have to understand 78,000 words. In each line of the Quran, 9 words are there. 125 frequently occurring words that come in the Quran 40,000 times. Every 10th word of the Quran is from Surah Al-Fatiha.
Soothing compilation.
When we open the Quran, immediately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts talking to us.
Direct communication.
Our relationship with the Quran is direct, personal, planned and relevant. You're saying it, you're showing it, you're thinking about it, you're listening, you're watching the words, and that's the way to go.
Let's comprehend the pure words that came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Let's Understand the Quran. Every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 5 p.m. UK and 6 p.m. Europe on Peace TV.
The month of Ramadan in which the Quran was revealed.
To reform people.
During Ramadan, that history of humanity made a big turn from darkness into light.
To purify their souls.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the month of Ramadan a blessed time.
To welcome them to the right way.
During the month of Ramadan, the gates of paradise are open and the gates of the hellfire are locked and the devils are chained.
Join Muhtasham Al-Hamidi.
Are you determined to change this Ramadan?
Let not the opportunity to know how to get the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pass by in Inspirations. Every Sunday to Friday at 9:30 p.m. UK and 10:30 p.m. Europe, and every Saturday at 6:30 p.m. UK and 7:30 p.m. Europe on Peace TV.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. We're talking about corollaries and subsidiary maxims of the major Islamic legal maxim, al-yaqeenu la yazulu bi-shak, certainty is not displaced by doubt. And another one of these corollaries is al-aslu baqa'u ma kana ala ma kan. The basic rule is that things stay as they are. Okay, of course, we know that things do change in the world. But if you don't have evidence that thing in question has changed, then the basic assumption is that it's continuing on as before. Now it's a corollary of this other rule, so the evidence for the basic rule is evidence for it. However, there's also powerful kind of like rational empirical evidence for it, which is that unless you know that something's changed, it's reasonable to assume that it is like it was when you knew about it last. So, for example, if a wife claims that her husband divorced her, and the husband says, no, I didn't, then what do we know? We know that they got married, and that's what we're certain of. So this other issue is an issue that's doubtful. One party says yes, one party says no. Therefore, the weight of the evidence goes with the husband, and the wife's claim in that situation would be rejected. There's another kind of istishab which is noted in some schools of thought, some madhabs accept a principle of what's called reverse istishab. And what this means is that if you know that something is true now, you can assume that it was like that in the past. And so it's a kind of a backdating of the ruling. This is much more rare. Its application in fiqh is much more rare, but occasionally you see examples of it. Now, one example of this is that a son travels, and he leaves money with his father for safekeeping. He comes back, and the father has spent the money. You know, there's a hadith, أَنْتَ وَمَالُكَ لِيَبِيكَ. The Prophet ﷺ was addressing his son. He said, you and your property are for your father. But leaving that aside for a minute, looking at the issue of the father's condition. The father, he tells a judge, you know, I spent the money because I was in need of it. And the son says, you know, his condition was okay. You know, he didn't need to spend that money. In some Hanafi books, the ruling can be arrived at by looking at the current state of the father. If the father is well off and he says, you know, I was in need of it, then the judge would say, we don't, unless you have evidence, no. You're well off now, you were well off then. And the opposite would be true. If the father provides evidence, it's clear that he is currently in a state of financial difficulty and need, then when he says, I was in need when I spent the money, that his word would be accepted. So that's the case of what they call reverse istishab. Another example of this is that a person goes into the bathroom and, you know, he uses the facilities, and he had to lower his trousers while he was using the toilet. And while he's putting his trousers back on, the leg of the trouser brushes the floor of the bathroom. And there is, you know, a thin film of water on the bathroom. So what's he supposed to do? Is he supposed to consider that his pants leg has become najis, or is it still tahir? When he put the pants on, he knew that his pants were clean, pure. And now this doubtful issue has arisen. You know, unless there's evidence that there is najasa there, you know, maybe you stoop down and take a whiff, there's no smell that there's something unclean there, then the assumption is that his trousers are still clean because you don't have strong evidence to change that ruling. An example of this that's really pertinent to Islamic finance is, what do you do when somebody misses payments? You know, they've purchased some item and, you know, the bank sold them a car or whatever. and after a year, he misses payment after payment. And he says, I'm suffering from hardship. So should the bank just say, okay, people who are in a state of hardship should be given a respite? فَإِنْ كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٍ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. It's a Quranic stipulation. And this is one of the things that's supposed to set Islamic finance apart from conventional finance. How do you treat people who are having difficulty repaying their debts? But when that person came for financing, they had to go through a process. What's your job? What's your income? What are your expenses? How much you pay for this and that? When they put all of those numbers through their algorithm, they come out with a ruling. The credit officer says this person has the capability to repay this debt. So that's now been established by evidence. So the person misses some payments and he says, I'm having difficulties. The debtor in this situation has to provide the evidence to say what has changed. Okay, if you have a sickness, you lost your job, those are legitimate excuses. You bring the evidence for that. Islamically speaking, the creditor in that situation is obliged. It's obligatory to give the debtor respite. They have to be given more time to pay their debt, and the amount they owe doesn't increase. That's a fundamental, elemental difference between Islamic finance, ideally, and conventional finance. Another manifestation of that in the modern system of Islamic finance would be with regard to takaful. Now, takaful is considered to be an Islamic alternative to insurance. The thing that removes the objections to conventional insurance about takaful are that it's structured not as an exchange contract, but as people coming together to help each other. And when that's the situation, then the strict rules of equality, you contribute and what you take out, don't apply the way they do to exchange contracts. This is a topic that will be discussed, inshallah, in further detail in another episode. But let's say that there is a takaful. A person has subscribed to become part of a takaful plan. And so then that person goes missing. That same issue that was spoken about in a previous episode, we know the guy was alive and he's gone missing, but we don't have any firm evidence that he's now dead. Well, his heirs, the beneficiaries of that takaful policy, they would not be able to claim the takaful benefits until firm evidence is provided that this person is actually dead. There's another corollary of this, which is al-aslu fi sifat al-arida al-adam. The basic rule with regard to transitory attributes is that they don't exist. So some attributes are inherent, like a person is born with green eyes or black skin or whatever. These are unchanging attributes. Other things like becoming adult or becoming sick, these are transitory attributes. So the basic rule with that is that they don't exist. So if somebody says that they did exist, they need evidence for that. So an example of that is a person who engaged in a business transaction, ended up losing money, and then, his heirs, or not his children, his sons, they say, wait a minute, at the time that he was doing that business deal, he was actually insane. So the guy who took his money should be given the money back unless, it can be proved that he was insane at that time. Then that claim would be rejected based on this qaida. And there's also another qaida that says when you have an opinion that was based on some evidence, and then it becomes clear that that evidence was false, then that opinion must be just dropped. No legal consideration is given to it. An example of that from the Sunnah is that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ. He'd gotten married to a woman, and somebody came to him and said, "Hey, I nursed you when you were a child, and I nursed your wife, so you really shouldn't be married." And so he came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, "This is what happened. Now, I don't know that she nursed me." He said, "She knows. You can't continue. So you thought that she was not a mahram for you, and now you find out that she was a mahram for you, so the marriage had to be dissolved in that case." So these are all corollaries of that maxim, and they have many applications in fiqh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.
إلهي أنت ربي ذو الجلال علمت